Hello and welcome. Choosing the right paper is one of the most important decisions for any pastel artist. The surface you work on can change the way your artwork looks and feels, and it can make your drawing process smoother or more difficult. Now, as artists, we all want a paper that holds the pastel well. It allows layering and supports fine details. In this video, I'll introduce you to the Canson Mi-Teintes Velvet, a new pastel paper that could be a game changer for your art, and I'm excited to share how it performed. Now, before diving into the review, let's just talk about why choosing the right pastel paper is so important. Different papers have different textures, thicknesses, and surfaces. Each type of paper reacts differently to pastels. Some papers hold the layers of pastel better than others, while some will blend more easily. So finding a paper that suits your style can make your pastel work much easier and more enjoyable. Now, my favourite pastel paper has always been Clairefontaine's Pastel Matte. It allows for great layering and works well for creating fine details. But even I've encountered a few issues with quality and have run into issues like the paper curling. So when I heard about Canson Mi-Teintes Velvet, I was very curious to see how it would stack up against Pastel Matte. So the Canson Mi-Teintes Velvet is a pastel paper that feels like a mix of both Pastel Matte and velour. And the first thing I noticed was the paper's smooth yet textured surface, which I was hopeful would allow for detailed work. It comes in pads of 12 as well as larger individual sheets, and while it's not cheap, it does appear to be slightly less expensive than Pastel Matte, making it a more budget-friendly alternative. But unlike Pastel Matte, the Canson Velvet pads do not come with the glassine sheets between each piece of paper. Now, this isn't a big deal for me, but it might be for some of you who just like that extra protection between the sheets of paper. Now, the paper comes in a variety of colours, and I managed to source 3 pads, the cool tones, grey tones and brown tones, which should make it easy to find a colour that will suit any subject matter. Now, each pad has 4 sheets of each colour in that range. I decided to test out the Graphite Grey from the Grey Tones pad and found it easy to work with, and it complemented my pastel colours well. I first put this new paper to the test by creating a detailed eye drawing that required fine lines, blending and vibrant colours. And the paper held up incredibly well, and I was able to layer the pastels without any trouble, and the colours remained rich and vibrant throughout the process. I then wanted to see how it would handle using soft pastels and pan pastels, as well as the pastel pencils. And much like Pastel Matte, it held each layer well, which of course is very important for adding depth and richness to your artwork. The first layer of pastel held strongly, which gave me a solid base to build on, and it allowed me to continue adding more colours without losing that tooth of the paper. Even after several layers, I was still able to apply more pastels without any problem. Now, an important thing for me is whether the paper will allow lighter pastels to show up over darker layers, and I was impressed with how well the lighter colours adhered to the paper. It wasn't difficult to add bright colours over my darks, which is crucial when working on animal portraits. Now, if you're familiar with Pastel Matte, you'll notice that the Canson Velvet has a similar texture. Both papers allow for multiple layers of pastel and are excellent for creating fine details. However, Canson Velvet feels a little thicker and sturdier, which makes it easier to handle. Now, some recent issues people are experiencing with Pastel Matte are that sometimes lines appear on the paper, especially when applying pastels in the background. Now, minor lines can be blended out, but if the lines are deep, you might think your artwork's ruined, and no one wants that. Next is an inconsistent texture. Some sections of Pastel Matte can either be too rough or too smooth. In the rougher areas, the texture shows through, while in smooth areas, the pastel doesn't adhere properly. Now, whilst those rougher areas can be fixed, unfortunately, the smooth ones can't. And occasionally you may see white dots, which are actually indentations where the surface hasn't been properly coated. And one other issue I've had with pastel mat is that the paper curls. Sometimes after applying multiple layers of pastel, the pastel mat wants to curl up around the edges. The Canson Velvet didn't appear to have this problem, and it's stayed nice and flat since I've removed it from my drawing board. Now, for those who love the Hahnemuhle velour, Canson Velvet shares some of those characteristics. Like velour, Canson Velvet has a slightly soft texture that grips the pastel well, allowing for smooth blending, but unlike the velour, it doesn't feel as fabric-like. The Canson Velvet is thicker and feels more like a traditional pastel paper. The velour paper is great for creating soft textured portraits, and personally, and although I must admit I haven't used it a lot, I feel it works better with soft pastels or a softer, creamier pencil like the Stabilo Carbothellos. The Canson Velvet, however, achieved a similar effect, but it also supported finer details, and it handled the harder pencils like the Faber-Castell Pits more easily than the velour. So what are my final thoughts on the Canson Mi-Teintes Velvet? Well, after my initial tests, I can confidently say it is a strong contender. The paper seems to perform well in every key area, layering, blending and the fine details. It combines the best qualities of both pastel mat and Hahnemuhle, while also solving some of those little issues that I've had with those papers. However, if you're already using pastel mat and you're happy with it, I don't think there's any immediate need to switch over. But if you're facing some of those quality issues or you're just looking for something new, then the Canson Velvet is a great option to consider. It's versatile enough for both detailed and more expressive pastel work, and it provides a reliable surface for creating rich, vibrant artwork. Well, I hope this video has been helpful to you, and I'll catch you in the next one.